be speaking in English. On a sunny September day, 171 years ago, in this exact spot in rural Vermont, at this curve of the railroad, there was a railroad crew hard at work laying down these tracks. A young foreman who was supervising the crew by the name of Phineas Gage, who was described by everyone who knew him as hardworking, energetic, polite, and efficient, was laying a charge at a particularly difficult stretch of rock that needed to be blasted. And then tragedy struck. As he was distracted by some of the workers behind him, he turned over his right shoulder to talk to them. And at the moment he opened his mouth, the blast went off involuntarily. An iron rod flew up from the hole, up through the roof of his mouth, behind his left eye, destroying the left frontal lobe of his brain, flying out through the top of his skull, landing 25 meters away, smeared in his blood and his brain tissue. He fell backwards, he convulsed a few times, and then miraculously, he sat up and spoke. The crew workers rushed to his side and took him into town, where he was treated by a Dr. John Harlow, and Harlow's notes can still be read today. And he was amazed that over the coming days and weeks and months, Phineas Gage made a full recovery. He was able to walk and talk and later on hold a job. But something was changed about him. The previously polite and energetic guy was lazy, irritable. He would curse all the time. He would eat in an animalistic way. He started sleeping with prostitutes. He was acting in ways that were completely not him. And Harlow wrote in his notes that Gage was no longer Gage. Now, the story of Phineas Gage has become legendary in medical science, and it is essential in the curriculum of neuroscience, philosophy, psychiatry, neurosurgery, neurology, all these fields that look at the brain and the mind, precisely because it shattered decades of understanding or belief that our personalities and the way we act and what we believe and our thoughts are somehow separate from the material brain. This Cartesian dualism that the mind is not the brain and the brain is not the mind. And in fact, this was one of the cases that proved that they are one and the same. The mind is the brain and the brain is the mind. Now, when this story is taught, I think one of the aspects that's not emphasized enough, at least, is that there's a positive spin to all of this. The fact that Phineas Gage was able to get up and walk and talk, despite destroying 25% of his brain tissue, speaks to the fact that the brain was able to hack other pathways and reconnect in a way to allow him to function. True that his personality changed due to the harm that happened to his brain, but he was able to function. I think this shatters other myths about the brain, and which we now know not to be true, but still remain mythologized within society, that we only use 10% of our brains, or only 10% of our brains are active at any one time. Not true. Or that once brain cells die, no new brain cells can be made, or once neural connections are severed, no neural connections can be made. Not true. Or that so-called scientifically minded people, logical people, engineering types are left-brained, and creative types are right-brained. Also not true. In the last 2 decades, the fields of neuroscience have been revolutionized by the understanding that the brain is not static and not dynamic. Indeed, it is very plastic and elastic. In April 2013, the United States government put its full force behind a new moonshot project on the order of the race to put a man on the moon or to map the entire human genome. And it was termed Brain Research through Applied Innovative Neurotechnologies. Sound?
That's what we're calling the Brain Initiative. You know, as humans, we can identify galaxies light years away. We can study particles smaller than an atom, but we still haven't unlocked the mystery of the 3 pounds of matter that sits between our ears.
So the stated goal of this project is to map the entire connectome of the human brain, every single connection. And hundreds of billions of dollars have gone into this project so far, 400 million in this year alone. And what's astounded everyone is that the amount of data that's coming out of just attempting to study the connection of the human brain has bankrupted our data, our ability to store this data. So it's been estimated that so far, the amount of data coming out of this project per year is equal to 300 exabytes. Now, if you're like me, most people in the audience have probably never heard of an exabyte. So let's put it into perspective. An exabyte is 10 to the power of 18 bytes, or 1 million terabytes. An exabyte as a unit of measurement is generally not used to measure data storage capacity, even in the largest cloud computing centers in the world, including Google's. Those are measured in petabytes, which are fractions of exabytes. It's been estimated that every word uttered by humankind from the beginning of existence would fit on 5 exabytes. 300 exabytes per year are coming out of this project. And that's really what's slowing down the project. So the brain is astounding in its complexity, and it is the greatest supercomputer ever. Now, computers today are amazing. They become smaller and faster, and graphics chips keep getting better, and we all carry supercomputers in our pockets now with our smartphones. Yet, computers have a constraint that they have not been able to bypass, which is, in the end, no matter how fast and how smart they are still using binary signaling. In the end, it's a 0 or a 1. The brain is a different kind of signaling system. The brain uses electrochemical signaling. So as an electrical impulse passes along one neuron and needs to connect with another neuron, it doesn't jump the gap electrically. Rather, a chemical messenger jumps this gap, which we call the synapse, and these chemicals are called neurotransmitters. And because at every single junction, the neurotransmitters can change in type and in amount and their receptors, and this actually means that there's a diverse way in which the signal can be propagated and communicated. What we're trying to do in computing is something that is similar to this, called quantum computing, where data can exist in multiple states. Now, the brain has been evolved to do this forever. Keep in mind that every single one of the brain's near 100 billion neurons is more complex than the city of London or Tokyo. It can manage multiple inputs and outputs at the same time, and it can connect to multiple cells around it. On average, a single brain cell connects at least 15,000 times to other brain cells around it. And this is happening 100 billion times in the brain in every second. So the connectome of the human brain is on the order of beyond trillions. And it creates a vast interwoven matrix that is then folded, and the pathways all overlap and connect. It's complexity beyond comprehension and beyond what we can really imagine, even though the imagination itself is coming from the brain. Now, let's take an example of how these pathways can connect to each other and be elastic. And we certainly know they are elastic. A very simple example that's existed for a long time is the ability of blind people to read. And they are reading through a language called Braille, which they touch. Now, the touch centers in the brain are normally not associated with language. And yet, a blind person can retrain their brain networks in order to be able to read through touch. More recent examples are things like cochlear implants, which allow deaf people to hear. Basically, what you're doing with these kinds of implants is getting a digital signal, so getting sound waves from the environment, translating into a digital signal, which is electrical, which then interfaces with the auditory nerve, which the brain then, with training, understands to be language, right? So you're actually plugging and playing devices into the brain, and the brain is smart enough to adapt its networks in an elastic way in order to make sense of all this. So the elasticity of the human brain is probably the seat of our creativity. As far as we know, we're the only species that is able to make a hypothesis, test that hypothesis, build on it, and move on. And I think this uniqueness to our brains and our ability to be elastic and adapt is the seat and the function of our creativity. No other species that we know of does this. No AI does this yet. Now, when we talk about the theory of creativity in the brain, most often what's mentioned is this theory: the left brain, right brain theory of creativity. And it's still romanticized and mythologized, and many people believe in it. The problem with this theory is that it was built on very little data. This theory originated from individuals who had very severe epilepsy or seizures, and at that time, medications could not control it. And so a barbaric type of neurosurgery was used, which was life-saving but brutal, in which a neurosurgeon would cut the fibers of the brain connecting the right and left hemispheres. And it was seen that a small amount of these individuals would lose their ability to have abstract thought and would become very concrete in their thinking, non-creative. Now, the problem with this theory is, A, it's not built on a lot of data, and B, stories like Phineas Gage and others teach us that the brain can rewire and can readapt, and the brain looks more like this. And this is actually imaging of the brain called diffuser tensor imaging, using currently available MRI technology, where you can map the fibers of the brain. And when the fibers of the brain were mapped, it turns out that they're interwoven in multiple directions and then folded on each other so that the pathways can swap in and out depending on your needs. So if we look at this complexity, we understand that the right brain, left brain theory does not make sense at all. If we really think about it, the seat of creativity can be understood by a breakdown of this matrix. So talk to any engineer, they'll tell you a complex system is far more productive than a simple system. But an engineer will also tell you that complex systems have more ways in which they can break down. And the brain is similar. Now, one of the clues to what is the theory of creativity and where creativity is coming from, at least from a neurobiological or a psychological perspective, is the shared experience of a brain networking breakdown by some of the most profoundly creative humans to walk the planet. So this idea has existed from the times of Aristotle or Plato, that highly creative people are prone to mood swings and to behavioral impulsivity. So you think of writers like Emily Dickinson and Victor Hugo, Sylvia Plath, Charles Dickens, Edgar Allan Poe, F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you think of artists like Jackson Pollock or Michelangelo, you think of composers like Tchaikovsky, Chopin, Schumann, Beethoven, even contemporaries like Sting, and you think about filmmakers and actors like Robin Williams and Catherine Zeta-Jones and Francis Ford Coppola. All of them, and many, many, many more, have been speculated or proven from their psychobiographies to suffer from mood disorders, and more specifically, a mood disorder called bipolar disorder. And bipolar disorder, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is a mood disorder that involves two poles. One pole is depression, and one pole is the opposite of depression, a very severe, elevated mood state called mania, which for some people feels very good, but can be very destructive. Now, this romantic notion over the 20th and 21st century through research studies has actually been proven. So studies on catchment areas or epidemiological catchment areas, such as this one, looked at the rate of mood disorders and bipolar disorder in writers and artists of profound creativity. And what was found is that the average population, only 1% to 3% of people should have mood disorders, where about 40% of profoundly creative artists and writers have a mood disorder that might look like or actually be bipolar disorder. So how does this make sense? And how does this create a shared trait with creativity and mood swings? So one theory of creativity neurobiologically, which I think makes a lot of sense, and I promise you this is the only scientific slide I'll put up, is that the creative drive is related to one of the chemical messengers I mentioned earlier in terms of electrochemical signaling called dopamine. And dopamine is this very important neurosignaling molecule for drive, pleasure-seeking behavior, and enjoyment. And it turns out that if you have high levels of dopamine in areas of the brain called the temporal cortex, you move towards more creative drive, but at an extreme, you can develop mania or psychosis. And if you go down on your dopamine in the frontal areas of the brain, you can move into creative block and into depression. And it seems like highly creative people, whether they develop bipolar disorder or not, are oscillating all the time between these two mood states. So they go into creative overdrive, and then they go into creative block. And at an extreme, they can go into mania, and at an extreme, they can go into depression. And I think I like socializing with creative types because I'm interested in all this research. Everyone I've talked to even if they don't have a diagnosis, and many don't, I'm not saying everyone does, but many don't, will still oscillate between these periods of creative drive and creative block. Now, what's fascinating about the elasticity of the brain is it appears that even during these periods of creative block, the brain is not just hibernating. The brain is actually working towards the next creative breakthrough. And this was proven in studies at Stanford University, looking at shared traits between people who are bipolar and people who are creative and don't have bipolar, and comparing them to people that neither have bipolar and are not at least profoundly creative. I think we all have the capacity to be creative, but not everyone is profoundly creative. And what they found was very interesting and unexpected. And I know the researchers that worked on this. The results surprised them. It turns out that the shared trait is negative emotion. So creativity appears to be driven by a dislike of the familiar. So these individuals had dislike scores towards familiar, non-abstract, simplistic images 700% higher than the average person. So their dislike of the familiar was much higher than their like of the abstract. And that appears to be what is happening during these periods of creative block. That the creative drives in the brain are under a slow cooking fire of negative emotion. And so it appears that creativity is actually driven by negative emotion during these states. And the negative emotion is needed. Now, if you look at artists, writers, and poets who are very self-reflective, even from the days before all these neuroscientific discoveries, they actually reflected on this. They actually noticed this in their own personas. Poe, for example, talks about this. And this is a self-referential poem in his works where he says, "And by a strange alchemy of brain." So he's talking about brain chemistry way before we discovered brain chemistry. "And by a strange alchemy of brain, his pleasure always turned to pain." So he's talking about the oscillation between these two states, creative drive and creative block. "His naivety to wild desire, his wit to love, his wine to fire. And so, being young and dipped in folly, I fell in love with melancholy." He fell in love with his negative mood states because he knew they were churning for the next creative breakthrough. The human brain has more neurons and more brain cells than the galaxy we live in. Indeed, if you took a single cubic centimeter of brain tissue, you would find more connections in that small space than stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And it's generally agreed upon between scientists of multiple fields, from microbiology to astrophysics and everything in between, that the human brain is the single most complex object ever discovered in the known universe. What's more astounding is that this 1.5 kilograms of gray wet tissue between your ears is your thoughts, is your emotions, is your dreams, is your drives. It is you. And what I want you to remember over the coming days in this wonderful conference and beyond is that the brain is limitless, it is unbounded in creativity, and it is elastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammad. First of all, a couple of points. I just found out that Fadi does not suffer from being bipolar or any mood swings, so we're fine here. And also, thank you for giving us, I think, one of the first talks that I've attended that gives me a scientific reasoning and evidence that we're all able to change our mindset. So none of you here has an excuse to leave the conference after 3 days having had only one state of mind. We hope to change your mindset into the better, all of us, not only you. And the third thing is I would like to be selfish and start with the Q&A. During our Diwaniyah yesterday,
Yes.
you stated that for your practice, you've had to go through your own psychoanalysis
Yes.
over a period of 4 years.
Yes.
And that helped you learn so many things about yourself, even though you haven't been diagnosed by any mood swings or bipolar or any mental disorder. How did that change your mindset and perception about yourself and your surrounding?
So just to give the background, when I was training as a psychiatrist, the program I trained at, it was, if you will, semi-mandatory to go through your own therapy. And I resisted for a little bit, by the way, in the beginning, because I said, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't think everyone has something wrong with them, right? And so I remember the first session with my therapist, and they assign you a therapist who is very senior because you're trying to treat a psychiatrist. It's very hard because they know what you're doing, right? And he said, so why are you here? And I said, well, because I have to be here. And but he said, well, you could have delayed, right? And I said, yeah, I could have, I guess, but I wanted to start. And he said, he did the first session, and at the end of the first session, he said, well, I'll tell you exactly what he said. He said, when two people are in this room, when two people are in this room, and one of them says, I'm here as an intellectual exercise, I know that one of the two people in the room is a bullshitter. And I looked at him quizzically, and he said, and he points at himself, and he said, and I'm not a bullshitter. And so he called me out, and I kept going every week for 4 years. And I can't go into detail of what I discovered about myself, but the way I'll answer your question is that it definitely allowed me to be much more self-reflective. And even though I thought I was non-judgmental before my own therapy, I think everyone has some judgment, but I decreased it to the amount that I think I can really accept anyone. It's helped me in my practice. And I think once we understand more about ourselves, we're able to separate our emotions more from the emotions of others, and that lets us have more empathy with people.
يعطيك العافية دكتور محمد. Topic amazing. I teach architecture in Kuwait University, and we deal with this idea of creativity. طلبة يعني their main point of view is to be creative. عندي سؤال لك. Is there a bipolar society? يعني إذا إحنا اعتبرنا كل إنسان is خلية وإحنا as a society نشكل عقل الكوميونيتي الكامل هذا، وهل مشاكل المجتمعات اللي غير كرييتيف هي basically is extremely normal society انها ما عندها التجاذب ما بين القطبين او الافكار فما ادري شنو انت رايك في هذا الموضوع.
So راح اجاوب سؤالك بطريقه سالتني بالعربي فراح اجاوبك بالعربي. So انا ما واحدة من الأشياء الأطروحات اللي أقولها اللي أحياناً تساء فهمها بس بحاول أقولها بطريقة ما تساء فهمها إن even though I'm designated a bipolar scholar by the International Society of Bipolar, I don't believe in bipolar, and I don't believe in depression, and I don't believe in schizophrenia, and I don't believe بأي واحد من التشخيصات هذه. أنا أعتقد إنهم فعلاً موجودين وإن في ناس مرضى ويحتاجون علاج، بس أنا أعتقد إحنا لحين مو فاهمين المخ كافي، ولذلك خذينا أحسن اللي نفهمه وجمعناه بعض الأعراض وقلنا هذا الانتيتي نسميه فصام وهذه الانتيتي نسميها ثنائي قطب. وطبعا نحتاج نسوي هذا الشيء عشان يجمع لنا طريقة علاجاتنا، ولكن أنا أعتقد اللي احنا نسميه باي بولر هو طيف كامل. جزء من الطيف هذا شديد ويحتاج علاج، وجزء من هذا الطيف ممكن يكون خفيف ويعني يتقبل بالمجتمع. المشكلة لما تطرح هذا الطرح إن بعض الناس يأخذون هذا اكسكيوز إن شخصية الفنان يعني دائما كذي فيتقمصون هذه الشخصية. لا، اكو ناس they are like that واكو ناس لا. وانا اعتقد يعني لما نتكلم عن elasticity او العقل المطاطي، احنا المفروض حتى تقبلنا او تفهمنا بالمجتمع يكون مطاطي بحيث ان انت متقبل جميع هذه الاطياف. فما اعتقد ان احنا نحتاج سوسايتي معين. انا اعتقد السوسايتي لازم ينمط لدرجة ان احنا نتقبل جميع هذه الاطياف، حتى الناس اللي يوصل لدرجة عنده مرض ويحتاج علاج. يعني كل هذا يحتاج انه يكون داخل الطيف.
سؤال here and you're next.
أهلين دكتور محمد.
أنا مو شايف.
هني.
إيه.
I have a question in terms of يعني what you were saying is basically I believe the term is neuroplasticity, and
yes.
then you separate between the mind and the brain.
Yes.
How does one access said neuroplasticity? Is it through the mind and then translates to the brain, or especially when it comes to things like addiction, anxiety, depression, how far can neuroplasticity take you basically?
Thank you for a very good question. So just to correct one thing, بالعكس, I'm saying the mind and the brain are the same thing. I'm not separating them at all. And how do we use the neuroplasticity to address these conditions? I think it's essential. يعني احنا العلاجات اللي نستعملها اليوم جزء منها تعالج الكيميكالز in the brain. أنا أتكلم عن العلاجات الدوائية وحتى النفسية الحوارية. يعني لا ننسى أن العلاج الحواري ترى يغير الكيميكالز اللي بالبرين. physical exercise يغير الكيميكالز اللي بالبرين. طريقة الأكل مالنا والنيوتريشن مالنا meditation يغير الكيميكالز in the brain. فالمثبت أن احنا مو بس قاعد نغير الكيميكالز، إن بتغيير الكيميكالز الدائم يبدي يصير في new networks in the brain. فأنا أعتقد أن احنا لازم نفكر بدائرة واسعة جدا، منها أدوية للحالات الشديدة، منها علاج حواري، ولكن في داخل هذا الطيف العلاجي الجانب الروحاني، الجانب التأملي، الجانب الفني، الجانب الرياضي، الجانب النيوتريشن. في كلمة بالإنجليزي يقول لك don't just pay lip service to these things. يعني they are part of the treatment envelope. أهلا صاحب النور. سامعك أنا أعيد السؤال.
I'm a writer. I just realized, my best articles and the most read articles, I wrote them in like half an hour.
Yes.
When I was so mad at an issue. I was so passionate about something, and I just, brought it out because the dislike about what you were saying, dislike and creativity. I just realized how it was. My question is about the dopamine. Is there a way of controlling the amount of dopamine in the brain, and does antidepressants help with that?
It's a very good question. So it's interesting. بالعربي عندنا مقولة شيطان الشعر, right? إن الشاعر يحس إن الشعر ينزل عليه مثل الوحي فجأة. And this is what you're describing. And I believe يعني بالنيوروساينس اللي قاعد يصير إنه بالفترة اللي قبل ما نزل هذا الشيطان أو ما نسميه شيطان. تعال فكرة، هذه فكرة شيطان الشعر موجودة بوايد ثقافات شرقية وغربية، بس تسمى أشياء مختلفة لأن هذا it fascinates me. It's a shared human experience بcultures عمرهم ما تلاقوا عندهم نفس هذه الكلمة الوحي أو شيطان الشعر أو إن الكرياتيفيتي. فجأة البرين قاعد يطبخ. There's a slow cooking fire during this negative emotion وفجأة it reaches a state where كله يجي مرة واحدة. و I think هذا اللي قاعد يصير معاك ومع أي أحد creative. من ناحية controlling it أنا دائما أقول إحنا we don't want to control it لأن إحنا داخل طيف معين إلا إذا وصل درجة مرض. وشنو الحد اللي إحنا نقول هو مرض عندنا بالطب النفسي؟ هو إذا الواحد عنده dysfunction، إذا الواحد مو قادر يتواصل مع الآخرين أو ما يكون عنده good social life أو مو قادر يدرس أو يشتغل، هني نتطلب العلاج. ولازم تروح حق أحد يعني يعرف جميع أنواع العلاج، لأن حسب شدة الحالة نقرر هل هذا المرض يحتاج علاج دوائي دائم، هل يحتاج علاج دوائي مؤقت، هل ما يحتاج علاج دوائي وبس يحتاج تغيير بنمط الحياة. فالناس اللي عندهم mood swings severe اللي نسميها bipolar disorder ما نستعمل antidepressants، نستعمل الأدوية نسميها mood stabilizers، ونعتقد إن it controls neuro-signaling. هذا لاحظي أن أنا قاعد أقول ما نسميه bipolar disorder ونعتقد، لأن I think when I was a younger man I كنت أقول هذا اللي يصير وهذا مع with more and more patients that you see and more expertise and more reading تكتشف إن إحنا نعرف القشور. فلأن إحنا نعرف القشور you have to stay humble. بس الهيوميليتي ما يمنعنا من إن نساعد أحد محتاج بأحسن الساينس اللي موجود. فأحيانا لما يجيني مراجع ويقول لي وأقول له أنت حالتك تحتاج دواء، أنت حالتك تحتاج علاج حواري، زين اشترك هذا أفضل ما توصل للعلم. هل تعتقد أن هذا صح؟ لا، ما أعتقد أن هذا صح. زين ليش نسوي؟ لأن هذا أحسن ما عندنا إياه، وأنا وياك راح نشتغل مع بعض ونتابع الأبحاث ونتابع إلى أن نوصل إلى شيء أحسن. I think we have to, patients and doctors have to maintain this humility in this complex organ ما مو فاهمين عنه كل شيء.
Doctor, I wanted to thank you for a beautiful talk.
Thank you so much.
Even more than that, I wanted to thank you for the beautiful answers that you gave to all the questions. I really salute you for trying to steer people away from labeling, as you know, your answer to the first question, and then for being a holistic professional, because this is something that we lack, and we really think we need to, I think we need to, مجتمعنا العربي, we need to get to that point where we're, you know, more holistic in the way we look at the human body and at the conditions. I don't want to call them diseases. So this leads me to the next question. I'm really fascinated with the gut-brain axis and all the research that's being done in the past probably 15 or 20 years.
Very hot topic.
Yeah, the effect of the bacteria, the microbiome on depression,
Yes.
and how serotonin, like 90% of serotonin really is released in the gut lining,
صح.
and how that affects our mood and how food affects our mood. So I'm just curious, because you've focused on bipolar, and I'm just curious, does that also apply to bipolar, or is that only
does.
for depression?
It does. There was a study published just last year in bipolar disorder. خذوا ناس بشرح للناس بسرعة للناس اللي ما يعرفون gut brain axis. في نظرية علمية جديدة أن البكتيريا النافعة اللي داخل جهازنا الهضمي لها آثار وايد على المخ بأمراض كثيرة مو بس نفسية، حتى أشياء مثل ألزهايمرز وباركنسونز ما نعرف بالضبط شلون لها علاقة بالمخ، بس بادية هذه الاكتشافات. فهذا اللي نسميه الgut brain axis أو اتصال الجهاز الهضمي بالمخ المباشر. ومثل ما قلتي السيروتونين اللي هو موصل الإشارة العصبية له علاقة بالقلق، بالتوتر، بالحزن، أكثره يطلع من الجهاز الهضمي مو من المخ، ويتواصل مع المخ عن طريق الفيغاس نيرف. المشكلة اللي قاعد تصير إن إحنا نستعمل أنتيبيوتكس. وعلى فكرة أنا يعني دائما لما أقول لازم أكون هوليستيك، ترى مو معناته أنا ضد الأدوية، أنا أكتب أدوية كل يوم وأشوفها تنقذ حياة الناس، بس هو جزء من الطيف. ولما أقول إن إحنا أنتيبيوتكس ممكن لها مساوئ، مو معناته أن الواحد عنده بكتيريا ما يأخذ أنتيبيوتك. حياة الإنسان زادت اللايف اكسبكتنسي because of vaccines, because of antibiotics, because of public health. فأنا كل هذا داخل الهوليستيك فريم ورك. بس استعمال الانتيبيوتكس led to إن وايد بكتيريا داخل الجهاز الهضمي النافعة قاعد تموت. ففي دراسة بالبايبولر ديسوردر إن أخذوا ناس عقب ما طلعوا من المستشفى بحالة مانيا، ونصهم أعطوهم العلاج الطبيعي الليثيوم أو أي واحد من العلاجات اللي هو حق البايبولر، ونصهم أعطوهم العلاج وأعطوهم معاه بكتيريا نافعة حبوب بروبيوتيك بكونسنتريشنز معينة، وتابعوهم لمدة 6 شهور، ولقوا إن نسبة الريهوسبيتاليزيشن أو الناس اللي دخلوا المستشفى مرة ثانية لحالة هوس أو حالة اكتئاب كانت أقل من النص بالناس اللي خذوا البكتيريا النافعة. ففي أبحاث بالبايبولر ديسوردر، في أبحاث بوايد مجالات.
Thank you, Doctor. Very informative talk. 2 quick questions. How does psilocybin affect the connectivity in the brain? And are we elastic enough in the Middle East to do a Johns Hopkins style study?
Yeah. So you're hitting me on a nerve that I like. Psilocybin, which is the active chemical compound found in what's termed to as magic mushrooms. So psilocybin is a 5-HT1A agonist, a serotonin 1A receptor agonist. تم اكتشاف psilocybin in giving it in the proper setting can lead to changes in a person's outlook and indeed their personality. The only chemical compound ever given to a human being that has changed one of the 5 main aspects of personality. So there's one of the theories is that there's the 5 main aspects of personality. One of them is called open-mindedness. And psilocybin, given in a high dose in the proper setting in the Johns Hopkins, Imperial College, and Harvard trials, has been shown to increase an individual's open-mindedness after a single dose, and this was measured for up to a year afterwards. There is a FDA-approved trial now. هيئة الغذاء والدواء الأمريكية الحين has approved a trial for the first time called the Compass Pathways trial, looking at psilocybin كعلاج للاكتئاب، للقلق، لوايد أشياء. Now, هل اللي أنا قاعد أقوله إن السيلوسايبين مفروض يستعمل؟ لا، لأن أنا شفت ناس يأخذون سيلوسايبين ويصير عندهم panic attacks ويصير عندهم PTSD. فللحين الأبحاث جارية، يعني كأنك تأخذ دواء حق السكر للحين ما خلصت أبحاثها، ممكن تكون في مضاعفات على الكبد، للحين إحنا مو عارفين. بس أنا أعتقد في a lot of promise in psilocybin and other psychedelics, or what are termed psychedelics. The risk of harm or the risk of addiction بهذيلا فيه، بس وايد أقل من alcohol and nicotine, which are the only 2 drugs in the world that we've legalized in most countries. So I think it's a good step. وممكن يساعد PTSD الرهاب ما بعد الصدمة، ممكن يساعد بالdepression، ممكن يساعد بالanxiety. In the Middle East, I think بشكل عام بوايد أشياء بالطب إحنا ننطر شنو يقولون هيئة الغذاء الدواء الأمريكية أو الأوروبية. فonce أمريكا says it's okay من ناحية بحثية غالبا راح يدخل Middle East. وترى there's an industrial و capitalistic framework فوق الأدوية هذه صح؟ يعني لا شك إن vaccines are helpful بس drug companies make a lot of money from them. لا شك إن antidepressants are helpful for some people بس companies make a lot of money for them. فالحل مو إن إحنا نقول the companies are evil, we're never going to deal with them. ولا الحل إن إحنا نقول عادي أخذ أي دواء يعطيك. لازم نكون logical بالframework, right? فأكيد لما psilocybin تعتمد هيئة الغذاء والدواء الأمريكية راح تيجي شركة كبيرة وتعطيه اسم كذي you know that sounds you know like it's empowering you. That might be a nice name, empower or something like that. وبعدين يسوقونه. فلازم I think لازم نراقب الأبحاث بشكل دقيق جدا خلال الفترة الجاية. But thank you for raising the question. It's a very interesting field of research.
يعطيكم العافية.